I met Sarah when I was 28. It was one of those chance encounters that people like to call fate, two strangers crossing paths at the right moment, in the right place. I had stopped by a small bookstore downtown, just looking to kill some time, when I saw her. She was standing by a shelf of classic literature, completely absorbed in a book, her fingers absent-mindedly brushing against the pages as she read. Something about the way she was lost in that moment made me pause. Sarah had an effortless kind of beauty, warm brown eyes, auburn hair that caught the light in soft waves, and a presence that seemed to fill the room. But what stood out most wasn't her looks, it was her energy. She had this spark, this way of carrying herself that made it impossible not to notice her. She wasn't just reading a book, she was feeling it. I must have been staring longer than I realized because she suddenly looked up, met my eyes, and smirked. "You know, it's not polite to hover," she said, holding up the book as if daring me to comment on her choice. That was Sarah, quick-witted, confident, always ready with a challenge. I found myself laughing, making some offhand remark about the author, and before I knew it, we were talking. What started as a conversation about books turned into an hour-long discussion about everything from travel to music to the best place in town to get coffee. Sarah was different from anyone I had ever met. She had this fearless way of diving into conversations, of asking deep questions without hesitation. She was adventurous, spontaneous, and full of life. She could make friends anywhere, talk to anyone, and make them feel like they had known her forever. She was the kind of person who would plan a weekend trip on a whim just because she felt like it. I, on the other hand, was her opposite in many ways. I was reserved, practical, and preferred structure over impulse. I liked my routines, my carefully thought-out plans. I was never the type to strike up conversations with strangers or make split-second decisions. But Sarah? She had a way of pulling me out of my comfort zone, making me see the world through a different lens. Despite our differences, we just worked. There was an ease to being with her, like slipping into a rhythm that felt natural. I could listen to her talk for hours, fascinated by the way her mind worked, the passion in her voice when she spoke about the things she loved. And somehow, she found something in me that made her stay. We exchanged numbers that day in the bookstore. I wasn't sure if she'd actually call, but she did. And from that moment on, my life was never the same. Sarah and I started dating almost effortlessly. There was no dramatic chase, no games, just two people drawn to each other, slowly intertwining their lives. She had this way of making everything feel easy, like we had known each other forever. From our first real date, sitting on a park bench with coffee in hand, to late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn, being with her never felt forced. It just fit. Sarah was a whirlwind of energy and excitement. She would drag me to hole-in-the-wall restaurants she had read about online, insist on taking spontaneous road trips with no destination, and introduce me to new books, new music, new ideas. She had this relentless curiosity about life, a hunger to experience everything. She saw beauty in the smallest things, a crack in the sidewalk that resembled a map, the way the rain sounded against the window at night, the way strangers interacted in passing. I, on the other hand, was more grounded. I liked structure, knowing what came next. I was the kind of person who planned vacations months in advance, who kept a to-do list for everything, who found comfort in routine. And yet, with Sarah, I learned to embrace the unknown. She taught me how to let go, how to appreciate the unplanned. We balanced each other in ways that neither of us fully understood at first. When she was restless, I was her anchor. When I was too cautious, she was the one who reminded me that life wasn't meant to be lived entirely within carefully drawn lines. Our love wasn't perfect, but it was strong. We had our disagreements, of course. She was impulsive, I was calculated. She thrived in chaos, I found peace and order. But we always met in the middle. Within a year, we moved in together. It wasn't a decision made lightly. Sarah valued her independence, and I was cautious about rushing things. But when it happened, it felt right. We found a small apartment just outside the city, with big windows that let in the morning light and a tiny balcony where she liked to drink her coffee. She filled the space with warmth, decorating it with mismatched furniture and paintings she had picked up from street artists. I made sure everything had its place, organizing our life together piece by piece. Nights were our favorite time. We would cook dinner together. Well, I would cook, and she would talk, tell stories, dance around the kitchen with a glass of wine in hand. We would lie in bed, listening to the hum of the city outside, and talk about everything and nothing. I thought I had found the person I would spend my life with. Sarah was my best friend, my partner, my home. And for a long time, I truly believed that nothing could shake us. But life has a way of proving us wrong. As the years passed, Sarah and I built a life that felt solid, unshakable. We got married in a small, intimate ceremony, just the way she wanted, nothing extravagant, just us, our closest family and friends, and an evening filled with laughter and music. She wore a simple dress, her hair flowing freely the way she liked it, and when she walked down the aisle, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Marriage didn't change much between us at first. We were already deeply intertwined, already understood each other's quirks and rhythms. I knew she liked to sleep in on Sundays, waking up only when the smell of coffee pulled her from bed. She knew I needed my quiet moments, my time to reset when the world felt too chaotic. We had our own traditions, Friday night movie marathons, morning walks to the cafe down the street, road trips where she would pick the music and I would navigate. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. Sarah had always been restless, always searching for something more. While I was content in stability, she thrived on change, on newness. Over the years, she tried her hand at different things, painting, photography, writing. Some lasted longer than others, but I supported her in all of them, knowing that was simply who she was. She wasn't meant to stay in one place for too long. But despite that, she always came back to me. I, on the other hand, was steady in my career, moving up in my company, making careful, calculated decisions about our future. I was the planner, the provider, the one who made sure we were always secure. Sarah would joke that I thought too much about the future and not enough about the present, but I didn't mind. Someone had to keep us grounded. For the longest time, I thought we had found the perfect balance. She gave me adventure, I gave her stability. She made life exciting, I made it safe. It worked. Or at least, I thought it did. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that were forming long before I noticed them. The way she started staying out later with friends, the way she seemed distant even when we were in the same room. I ignored it, chalked it up to stress, to phases, to life simply moving forward. I believed in us. I believed in her. But belief alone wasn't enough. I just didn't know it yet. Looking back, I wish I had seen the signs for what they were. At the time, I convinced myself they were nothing, small changes, natural shifts that happened in every marriage. But in reality, the woman I had built a life with was slowly slipping away from me. It started with little things. Sarah had always been outgoing, always had a wide circle of friends, but she began going out more frequently. At first, it was casual, dinners with coworkers, drinks with old friends. I never questioned it. She was social, and I had never been the kind of husband to restrict her freedom. If anything, I encouraged it. I wanted her to be happy, to feel fulfilled. But then, the frequency increased. Once a week became twice, then 3 times. The text messages became more frequent, her laughter over the phone more secretive. She would smile at her screen, quickly locking it when I entered the room. When I asked, she would brush it off. Just talking to Claire about her new job, or, it's nothing, just catching up with an old friend. I wanted to believe her. I chose to believe her. Then came the excuses. She started working late, even though I knew her job had never required it before. Some nights, she came home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers, claiming a friend had sprayed too much and it had rubbed off on her. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being paranoid, that Sarah was just Sarah, impulsive, adventurous, unpredictable. But something was different. There was a distance between us now, an invisible wall I couldn't break through. Conversations that used to flow effortlessly now felt forced. Our nights together became fewer and fewer, our traditions quietly fading away. She would crawl into bed late, her body turned away from mine, and I would lie awake, wondering what had changed. The worst part was that she wasn't cruel about it. She wasn't cold, wasn't hostile. If anything, she was nicer, overly affectionate when she was home, making grand gestures as if trying to overcompensate for something. But her eyes told a different story. There was something hidden there, something I wasn't supposed to see. I kept telling myself that marriages go through phases, that people change, that I just needed to be patient. Maybe she was struggling with something she didn't know how to talk about. Maybe she was just bored of our routine. But deep down, an unsettling thought had already planted itself in my mind. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Doubt has a way of creeping in like a slow, invisible tide, pulling everything you thought was solid out from under you. At first, it was just a feeling, something I couldn't quite name, but couldn't ignore either. It started with Sarah's little changes, the subtle shifts that felt harmless in isolation, but, when pieced together, painted a picture I didn't want to see. The nights out became more frequent, the explanations shorter, the warmth between us dimmer. She was still affectionate, still said I love you before bed, but it felt rehearsed, like a habit rather than something she meant. I tried not to read into it. I told myself it was just a phase, that maybe she was just going through something she didn't know how to talk about. After all, every marriage has its ebbs and flows. But then there were the inconsistencies. She would say she was going out with one friend, but later, when I casually brought up that person in conversation, she'd hesitate, backtrack, or claim she had meant someone else. Her phone, once carelessly left on the counter or tossed onto the couch, was suddenly always with her, either in her pocket or face down on the table. She started dressing differently, not just dressing up, but with a particular effort, like she was trying to impress someone new. There were small moments where I caught glimpses of something off. A text notification she quickly swiped away, a sudden, distracted smile when she was looking at her screen, the way she seemed just a little too eager to leave the house some nights. It wasn't one big thing that set off my alarm bells. It was 100 little things, each one insignificant on its own, but together forming an undeniable pattern. The worst part was that she wasn't cruel about it. She wasn't distant in the way that made it obvious something was wrong. If anything, she was even sweeter than before, bringing me coffee in the mornings, asking about my day, giving me lingering kisses when she got home. But it didn't feel real. It felt like guilt. And maybe that was the worst part of all. One night, she left, saying she was meeting up with an old friend for dinner. I didn't ask questions, didn't press for details, because I knew that if I asked too much, she would just come up with another excuse, another lie wrapped up in something believable. An hour later, I sent her a message, just a simple hope you're having fun, and that's when I saw it. Her location was turned off. Sarah had never turned off her location before. Ever. Not once in the years we had been together. I stared at my phone, my stomach twisting into knots. I didn't say anything when she got home that night. I didn't accuse her, didn't confront her. I just watched her, watched the way she hummed as she kicked off her shoes, the way she kissed me absent-mindedly on the cheek, the way she slipped into bed with a sigh that sounded almost content. But I wasn't content. That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, unable to silence the growing storm inside me. Something was happening. Something she wasn't telling me. And I needed to find out what it was. The feeling wouldn't leave me. That gnawing, uneasy sense that something wasn't right sat in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. At work, I found myself distracted, replaying the small, seemingly insignificant moments that had built up over the past few months. The nights out, the secrecy with her phone, the way her eyes never quite met mine when I asked how her evening had been. Every time I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, something new would happen to pull me back into suspicion. Sarah's schedule started shifting in ways that didn't make sense. She used to have predictable routines, morning coffee, work, occasional outings with friends. But now, there were gaps, spaces in her day that weren't accounted for. She'd tell me she was running errands, but return home without any bags. She'd claim to be working late, yet when I casually asked about her workload, her explanations were vague, filled with contradictions she didn't seem to notice. When I asked simple questions, who were you with? Where did you go? Her answers were always just a little too rehearsed, too careful. She wasn't being careless. If anything, she was being too careful. I started watching more closely, not because I wanted to catch her doing something wrong, but because I needed to know. The idea of suspecting her without proof, of carrying this doubt in my chest every day, was driving me insane. So I started paying attention to the details, the way she dressed before going out, the way she reached for her phone the moment a notification appeared, the way she seemed to be constantly texting someone, only to tuck her phone away the moment I walked into the room. One night, when she was in the shower, I glanced at her purse on the kitchen counter. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do. I had never invaded her privacy before, had never even thought to check her things. But the doubt was eating me alive. Slowly, I unzipped the bag and looked inside. Her wallet. Her keys. A small bottle of perfume I didn't recognize. And then, at the bottom of the bag, something that made my breath hitch. A hotel key card. I stared at it, my mind racing. There was no reason for Sarah to have a hotel key. She hadn't mentioned any work trips, hadn't said anything about visiting friends out of town. My hands tightened around the card as my heart pounded in my ears. This was something real, something I couldn't explain away, no matter how much I wanted to. I put everything back exactly as I found it before she stepped out of the shower, acting as if nothing had happened. She smiled at me, kissed my cheek, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I answered, forcing my voice to sound normal, but inside, something had cracked. I didn't have undeniable proof yet, but I had something close to it, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. The hotel key card sat in the back of my mind like a ticking time bomb. No matter how much I tried to push it aside, to pretend it wasn't there, the weight of it pressed down on me. It was proof, maybe not of an affair, but of something. And yet, I still hesitated. I could have confronted her that night. I could have held it up and demanded an explanation. But a part of me, the part still clinging to the woman I had loved for so many years, wasn't ready to hear the answer. Instead, I watched. I waited. I paid attention to every little thing, hoping that somehow I was wrong. But the cracks only deepened. Sarah started avoiding me in ways that felt intentional. If I came home earlier than usual, she seemed almost startled to see me. Our conversations became shorter, filled with half-hearted smiles and empty reassurances. She laughed less, touched me less. And then there were the moments that felt almost too normal, like she was trying to overcompensate. She would come home with my favorite beer, suggest a movie night like we used to have, kiss me in ways that felt forced. It was as if she could sense the distance growing between us, but instead of pulling me closer, she was trying to keep me distracted. I wasn't distracted. I was more focused than ever. One evening, while she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through our bank statements. It was a quiet kind of desperation, the kind that made my hands shake as I scrolled through the transactions, looking for something, anything, that would explain the key card, the disappearances, the lies. And then I saw it. A charge from a hotel. Not just any hotel, but the same one the key card belonged to. My stomach twisted. I checked the date. 2 weeks ago. The same night she had told me she was working late. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, the numbers blurring together. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, maybe for the reality of it to hit me in full force. But it didn't. Instead, I felt something colder settle inside me. The truth wasn't some distant fear anymore. It was here, right in front of me. Sarah was lying to me. And I wasn't sure I even recognized the woman I had married anymore. That night, I barely spoke to her. She noticed, of course. Asked me if everything was okay, if work had been stressful. I just nodded, forcing a tired smile, knowing that if I opened my mouth, something would slip out, something I wasn't ready to say. I still didn't have undeniable proof. Not yet. But I knew it was coming. And I knew that once I had it, there would be no going back. I came home later than usual that evening, exhausted from a long day at work but still carrying the storm of doubt inside me. The weight of my suspicions had become unbearable, but I hadn't confronted Sarah yet. Maybe it was cowardice, maybe it was denial. Either way, I wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. As I stepped through the front door, I immediately noticed something was off. The house was too quiet. Sarah's car was in the driveway, but there was no sign of her in the living room or kitchen. My son, Daniel, who was spending the week with us, was sitting on the couch, staring at the floor with a look I couldn't quite place. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched into fists. I knew that look. It was the look of someone holding something back, something heavy. I set my keys down and frowned. "What's wrong?" I asked. Daniel didn't look up. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, in a low, shaking voice, he muttered, "Dad. Mom's upstairs. She's not alone." The words hit me like a hammer to the chest. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't think. My body refused to accept what my mind already knew. "What do you mean?" My voice was eerily calm, but I could feel the rage bubbling beneath the surface, growing hotter with every second. Daniel looked up at me then, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach twist. Pain, betrayal, anger. "I saw her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "With someone else. In your bedroom." Something inside me snapped. I didn't need to ask who it was. I already knew. The hotel key, the secrecy, the lies, it all led to this moment. Without another word, I turned and stormed up the stairs, my heart pounding so violently it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I didn't hesitate. I didn't knock. I slammed the bedroom door open so hard it hit the wall with a deafening bang. And there they were. Sarah was tangled in the sheets, her face frozen in horror, scrambling to cover herself. And beside her, half naked, his expression morphing from shock to fear, was him, her ex-husband. For a moment, time stood still. The room, the air, even my own heartbeat. It all disappeared in the face of the rage that consumed me. My entire body burned with it, my vision tunneling as pure fury surged through my veins. "You disgusting piece of shit," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. My fists clenched at my sides, shaking with the force of my restraint. Sarah stammered something, her voice a pathetic mix of excuses and pleas, but I didn't hear a single word. My eyes were locked onto him. This worthless bastard, sitting in my bed, in my house, touching my wife. Without thinking, I lunged. I grabbed him by the arm and yanked him off the bed with a force that sent him stumbling to the floor. He barely had time to react before I hauled him up and shoved him backward. He hit the dresser with a grunt, knocking over everything on top of it. "Get the fuck out of my house," I roared, my voice shaking the walls. He stammered something. "It's not what it looks like," but I was done listening. I grabbed his clothes, his shoes, everything he had scattered around my room, and threw them straight at his face. "Get out now!" He scrambled to his feet, fumbling to pull his pants on while Sarah just sat there, motionless, her face pale as a ghost. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging for forgiveness, just sitting there, stunned, like she couldn't believe this was really happening. He rushed past me, bolting down the stairs half-dressed, practically tripping over himself to get away. I followed, making sure he was out the door before I slammed it shut, so hard the windows rattled. Then, I turned back to Sarah. She was standing at the top of the stairs now, wrapped in a sheet, her arms wrapped around herself. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off before she could even try. "Don't say a word." She flinched. For the first time in our marriage, she looked truly afraid of me, not because she thought I would hurt her, but because she knew there was nothing she could say to undo what she had done. I stormed past her into the bedroom and started pulling open drawers, grabbing her clothes, her belongings, anything that belonged to her. I didn't care what it was. I just wanted it out. "What are you doing?" she finally choked out, her voice trembling. "What does it look like?" I snapped, throwing an armful of her clothes onto the floor. "You're leaving, right now." Her eyes widened. "Please, let's just—" "Shut up, Sarah." I didn't yell. I didn't scream. My voice was quiet, controlled, but dripping with so much venom that she visibly shrank back. "You made your choice. Now get out." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. Whatever love I had for her had died the moment I saw her in our bed with another man. She hesitated for a moment, like she was waiting for me to calm down, to change my mind. But I wasn't going to. I had been patient. I had ignored the signs. I had trusted her, and she had thrown it all away. Finally, she moved. Slowly, she started gathering her things, stuffing them into the suitcase I had thrown onto the bed. Every movement was shaky, every breath uneven, but I felt nothing for her anymore. No sympathy, no regret, just pure, unfiltered disgust. When she was done, I stepped aside and gestured to the door. "Go." She looked at me one last time, her eyes pleading, searching for something. Anything, but I just stared back, stone-faced, unmovable. And then, without another word, she walked out of my life. The moment the door shut behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were still shaking, my chest still burning, but for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. It was over. She was gone, and I would never let her back in again. The next morning, I woke up to a house that felt different, emptier, yet somehow lighter. The weight of doubt, of suspicion, of wondering what Sarah was doing when she wasn't with me, it was all gone. In its place, there was something else, something sharper. Rage. Not the kind that explodes in a single moment, but the kind that simmers, that lingers in your bones, that demands action. Sarah had destroyed our marriage, humiliated me in my own home, and involved my son in her betrayal. She had ripped apart everything we had built, all for him, her ex-husband, the man she swore was nothing more than a part of her past. And now? Now she would face the consequences. I wasn't just going to let her walk away from this unscathed. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. I wanted the divorce filed immediately. There was nothing to discuss, no waiting period, no reconciliation to be had. I wanted it done as fast as legally possible. I didn't just want to leave this marriage. I wanted to burn it to the ground. My lawyer, a sharp and efficient man, assured me he would handle everything. Given the proof of Sarah's infidelity, I had every right to refuse alimony, to keep the house, to make sure she walked away with as little as possible. "She's going to fight this," he warned me. "Let her try," I said. my voice colder than I had ever heard it. Next, I went through the house and removed every last trace of her. Clothes, pictures, jewelry, anything that belonged to her, anything that reminded me of her, was packed into garbage bags and dumped at the front door. I didn't care what happened to it. She could come get it, or it could sit there for the trash collectors. Either way, it was no longer my problem. Then, I changed the locks. She had betrayed me in our home, in our bed. The thought of her still having access, of her stepping foot inside this house again, made my skin crawl. By the afternoon, I had a locksmith come in and replace every lock. Whatever connection she once had to this place was now severed. It wasn't enough. I needed her to feel this, to understand that she hadn't just broken my heart, she had made an enemy out of me. So, I made sure everyone knew. Sarah was always concerned with appearances, with how people saw her. She loved being admired, loved playing the role of the perfect wife, the charming friend, the person who had it all. She thrived on validation. And now, I was going to take that away from her. I started with friends and family. I made sure everyone knew the truth. I sent a simple message, no exaggerations, no embellishments, just the cold, hard facts. For those who haven't heard, Sarah and I are divorcing. I caught her cheating on me in our own home, with her ex-husband. I have nothing more to say to her, and she is no longer welcome in my life. The responses came flooding in. Some were shocked, some were disgusted, and those who had always suspected there was something off about her, weren't surprised. But the best part? People chose sides. And for once, Sarah wasn't the one being defended. She called me that night. I almost ignored it, but I wanted to hear the desperation in her voice. "Why are you telling people?" she cried the moment I answered. "Because it's the truth," I said flatly. "This is between us. You're making me look like a monster." I let out a bitter laugh. "You don't need my help with that. You did that all by yourself." She started sobbing, saying how much she regretted it, how she made a mistake, how she had been confused, how she never meant to hurt me. "You weren't confused when you were fucking him in my bed," I cut in. "You weren't confused when you lied to my face for months. You weren't confused when you made our son witness your betrayal." Silence. I could hear her breathing, the hiccuping of her tears, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, just satisfaction. "You made your choice, Sarah. Now you get to live with it." I hung up, blocked her number, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. She wanted to cheat? Fine. But she wasn't going to walk away without consequences. This was just the beginning. Sarah had always been someone who thrived on admiration. She cared about her reputation, about being liked, about being seen as the perfect, desirable woman who had it all, a loving husband, a stable life, respect from friends and family. But now, all of that was crumbling around her, and I was going to make sure she felt it. The fallout from my message was immediate. Our friends, our family, everyone knew. I wasn't dramatic about it. I didn't rant or scream. I simply told the truth, and I let the truth do the damage. The people who had once admired her, the ones who had believed in her, now saw her for what she was, a liar, a cheater, a woman who had torn her own family apart for the sake of something cheap and temporary. Her calls kept coming. I ignored them. Her messages, apologies, desperate pleas, long paragraphs about how she had made a mistake, went unanswered. She even showed up at the house once, knocking on the door, crying, begging to talk. But I just stood on the other side, silent, unmoving. I wanted her to feel exactly what she had done to me. The cold rejection, the isolation, the nothingness. But it wasn't just personal, it was financial, too. Sarah had always relied on me for stability. While she had worked, she had never taken full responsibility for our finances. She enjoyed the comfort of knowing I handled everything, that our life was secure because I made it that way. Now, that was gone. The divorce was moving fast. My lawyer had filed everything, and with the evidence of her infidelity, I had the upper hand in every way. She wasn't getting alimony. She wasn't getting the house. She wasn't getting anything that I didn't willingly allow her to take. And the best part? Her ex-husband, the man she had risked everything for, was already backing away. A mutual friend told me what I had suspected all along. He hadn't been in love with her. He had enjoyed the thrill, the ego boost, the satisfaction of getting back something that had once been his. But now that it had all blown up in her face, now that she was officially leaving me, that she had nowhere to go, that she was his problem, he didn't want her anymore. She had left a stable, loving marriage for nothing. The realization must have hit her hard, because the next time she tried to call me, she left a voicemail, the first one I actually listened to. Her voice was different this time. The arrogance, the defensiveness, the justifications were all gone. All that was left was pure, pathetic desperation. Please, just talk to me. I don't have anywhere to go. He's not who I thought he was. I was stupid. I was selfish. I know that now. I don't know what to do. She was breaking. The woman who had once stood so confidently, who had lied to my face with a smile, who had chosen to betray me, was now watching her world collapse around her. And I felt nothing for her. This was what she deserved. She had thrown away everything. And now, she had to live with it. The finality of it all settled over me like a quiet storm. The anger had burned bright and fierce, but now it was something else, clarity. I had done everything I needed to do. Sarah had made her choices, and now she was paying the price. There was no sympathy left in me, no second thoughts, no lingering what-ifs. She had destroyed our marriage, humiliated me, and betrayed the trust that I had spent years building. And now, she was alone in the wreckage. The divorce papers were officially in motion, moving faster than she had probably expected. She had no leverage, no bargaining power. Every legal advantage was in my hands, and I wasn't being generous. The house, mine. Any claim to my assets? Gone. The life she had taken for granted, the security she had always assumed would be there, had been ripped away. And the best part? Her ex-husband, the man she had risked everything for, wanted nothing to do with her anymore. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that he had been distant since the fallout. What once must have felt exciting and secret had turned into something ugly and exposed. He hadn't wanted a life with her, just a stolen moment, a victory over me. And now that Sarah was truly on her own, he had no reason to stick around. He had used her, just like she had used me. She called me again. Another voicemail. Please, just talk to me. I know I can't fix this, but I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I was stupid. I was selfish. Please. I just need to see you. I need to talk. I didn't respond. I didn't even feel the urge to. There was no satisfaction in her suffering anymore. Just emptiness. She wasn't my wife anymore. She wasn't anything to me. The last time I saw her was when she came to pick up her things from the front porch. I didn't speak to her. I just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching as she carried out the last remnants of the life we once shared. She looked different, exhausted, smaller somehow, as if the weight of her own decisions had finally crushed her. She turned to say something, her lips parting like she was about to plead one last time, but I didn't let her. I just shook my head. You did this, Sarah. Now live with it. And then I shut the door. It was over. She was gone. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe again.